Growing up, I always tried to do the right thing. I'm Amelia, 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my younger sister Sarah has been the center of chaos in our family. We're only 2 years apart, but it feels like we've always lived on completely different wavelengths. If there was one constant in my life, it was Sarah's ability to turn even the calmest situations into a storm. I don't know how it started. When we were little, we played together like most siblings. I looked out for her, like any big sister would, making sure she was included in games and helping her with things she couldn't do yet. But as we grew older, things shifted. I stayed calm, quiet, and responsible, the one my parents could depend on. Sarah, though, was different. She cried more, yelled more, and fought more. If I said no to something she wanted or disagreed with her, she'd go straight to mom or dad and accuse me of being mean. And they believed her. At first, it was just little things you wouldn't think mattered. She'd say I took her toy, and I'd insist I hadn't. I remember one time when I was about 9, she walked into my room, grabbed one of my favorite stuffed animals, and hid it under her bed. When I noticed it was missing, I asked her if she had seen it. She shook her head, her face all innocence. "No, I didn't take it," she said with wide eyes. But when Mom found it days later in Sarah's room, she shrugged it off. "Sarah's younger, Amelia," Mom said. "She doesn't always understand." That was the beginning. By the time I was in middle school, Sarah had perfected her role as the victim, and I became the bad guy without even realizing it. If I tried to set a boundary, I was bossy. If I got frustrated, I was dramatic. And the worst part, Sarah knew how to play the game. She'd cry to my parents over things I hadn't done, twisting the story just enough so that her version seemed believable. I remember one afternoon when we were fighting over the TV remote. I grabbed it first and she yelled, "You hit me!" I hadn't even touched her, but by the time my parents walked into the room, her face was red and tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Amelia, what's wrong with you?" Dad had said. I couldn't believe it. The truth didn't matter. Sarah knew how to look small and hurt. I, on the other hand, was already labeled as the older sister who should know better. As we got older, things only escalated. My parents began to lean on me more, trusting me because I wasn't difficult like Sarah. I did well in school, followed the rules, and helped out where I could. Sarah struggled more. She had a short temper, got into fights with friends, and never seemed to finish anything she started. Mom and Dad spent hours trying to talk to her, but it was like she thrived on drama. If things were quiet, Sarah would find a way to stir them up. I remember when she was 14 and I was 16, Sarah had been saving up money for something. I think it was clothes or makeup. And then, suddenly, it disappeared. She ran into the living room, tears streaming down her face, accusing me of stealing it. I was shocked. I hadn't touched her money. "Why would I take your money, Sarah?" "I don't need it," I said, desperate to defend myself. But my parents didn't hear me. "Amelia, give it back," Mom said, her voice sharp. "It's not like you? It's not like me?" I repeated, stunned. I never forgot the look on Sarah's face when she saw how upset I was. She smirked, just a flicker of it before wiping her tears away. That was the moment I realized. Sarah knew exactly what she was doing. By the time we were both adults, I had already grown used to the fact that my parents would always believe Sarah first. It didn't matter what I said or how I tried to explain myself, she had a way of controlling the story. If she got into trouble, she could cry her way out of it. If I got upset, I was overreacting. Sarah could do no wrong, and I was always the one who had to shoulder the blame. What made it worse was that Sarah never let me forget it. She'd make little comments when no one was listening, things like, "They always take my side, you know," or "It's so easy to make you look bad." It was infuriating. I wanted to scream at her to make her stop, but I knew it wouldn't help. Losing my temper would only make her look more innocent and me more guilty. And so I learned to stay quiet. I stopped fighting back and just let things slide. Maybe that's what Sarah wanted. If I didn't push back, she wouldn't have as much material to use against me. I thought that if I stayed calm and mature, my parents and the rest of our family would see through her act eventually, but they never did. The incident that really solidified everything happened about a year ago. It was during a family barbecue. Everything was fine, at least that's what I thought, until Sarah suddenly pulled Mom aside and started whispering to her. Mom kept glancing at me, her expression slowly hardening. After the barbecue, Mom confronted me, asking why I had screamed at Sarah in front of everyone. I blinked, stunned. What? I didn't scream at her. I barely even talked to her. Sarah says you called her pathetic, Mom said, her voice heavy with disappointment. I didn't, I insisted. That never happened. But it didn't matter. Mom had already made up her mind, and Sarah played the victim like she always did. I didn't bother arguing anymore. I could see the truth was pointless. Looking back, I wish I had handled things differently. Maybe I should have spoken up more, pushed harder, or called Sarah out in front of everyone. But how do you fight someone who has already convinced everyone you're the problem? That's where it all started. Sarah's need for drama, my quiet resentment, and a family that would always see me as the stable one, the calm one, while Sarah got away with everything. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just kept being the good one, everything would eventually work itself out. I was wrong, and I had no idea just how far Sarah would go to turn everyone against me. As we moved into adulthood, I thought the childish rivalries and petty games would stop. I thought Sarah would grow up, but instead, her manipulation grew sharper, and the consequences of her lies cut deeper. At 31, I had built a stable life for myself. I had a steady job, a decent apartment, and a small but loyal group of friends. My relationship with my parents was complicated, but I managed to keep the peace, mainly by staying out of Sarah's way as much as possible. I told myself that as long as I focused on my own life, nothing Sarah did could hurt me anymore. I was wrong. It started a few months ago, during one of those dreaded family gatherings at my parents' house. I had no desire to go, but saying no would only lead to more drama, so I showed up, smiled, and played the role of the responsible older sister like I always did. The evening was typical. Mom fluttering between the kitchen and the dining table, Dad half watching football in the living room, and Sarah swanning in late as usual. She wore this air of casual confidence, as though the entire world revolved around her. She hugged Mom and Dad, smiled sweetly at everyone, and ignored me entirely, until we were alone. You look tired, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Work keeping you up at night, or is it just the stress of being you? I clenched my jaw but didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that engaging with her only gave her ammunition. Dinner was where things started to go wrong. Sarah has a knack for turning small talk into pointed jabs. When my aunt asked about my job, I was just about to answer when Sarah cut in. Oh, Amelia works all the time. No social life, no hobbies, just work. It's so sad. Everyone chuckled awkwardly, and I felt heat rush to my cheeks. I actually like my job, I said calmly. It's rewarding, and I've worked hard to get here. But Sarah wasn't done. That's great, she said, flashing her innocent smile. I just hope you don't end up miserable and alone, you know? Mom shot her a look. Sarah, that's enough. It's fine, I said quickly, forcing a tight smile. She's just joking. Sarah gave me a look that only I could interpret, her little smirk that said, I win. I spent the rest of the night avoiding her. I focused on helping Mom clean up, stayed out of the living room, and tried to keep to myself. I didn't want to give her any opportunity to create another incident, but Sarah didn't need my help to cause problems. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call from my mom and a flurry of unread messages. Confused, I opened one. Mom, we need to talk. Sarah told us what happened last night. I'm really disappointed in you. What? I stared at my phone, trying to piece together what she could possibly mean. I called her back, but it went straight to voicemail. The knot in my stomach tightened as I read the other texts. Dad, this has gone too far, Amelia. You need to get help. Cousin Sophie. Hey, are you okay? I heard about last night. I'm really worried about you. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart racing. What happened last night? I hadn't yelled. I hadn't fought. I hadn't done anything. But I already knew what had happened. Sarah, when I finally got my mom on the phone, her voice was cold. Sarah told me you had a complete meltdown last night, she said. She said you screamed at her for no reason and made her feel unsafe. I blinked. What? That never happened? She wouldn't make something like this up, Mom replied sharply. She was so upset she couldn't sleep. She said she doesn't know how to be around you anymore. Mom, she's lying, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. I didn't yell at her. I didn't even talk to her after dinner. Amelia, she said with a sigh, I think it's time you take a hard look at yourself. You've always had a temper, and you need to learn how to control it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I do not have a temper," I said, my voice shaking. "Sarah is lying to you, and you know it." But she didn't know it. She believed Sarah because she always did. I hung up and stared at the wall, anger and frustration swirling inside me like a storm. This wasn't the first time Sarah had pulled something like this, but it felt worse now, more deliberate, more damaging. I had done nothing wrong, yet here I was, the villain, once again. I reached out to my cousin Sophie, hoping she could tell me what Sarah had been saying. "I don't know all the details," Sophie admitted hesitantly, "but Sarah told everyone you've been acting unstable lately. She said you screamed at her out of nowhere and scared her." "That's a lie," I said firmly. "I believe you," Sophie said, "but you know how Sarah is. She's really convincing." Convincing. That was the word that haunted me. Sarah could cry on command, spin stories like a professional, and make people believe anything she wanted them to. Meanwhile, I was left floundering, trying to prove I wasn't the monster she painted me as. I spent the next few days in a haze of frustration and disbelief. My parents stopped answering my calls, and my dad blocked me on social media. Sarah, on the other hand, was probably sitting somewhere smug, knowing she had succeeded yet again. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't keep living my life with Sarah holding all the cards, twisting every situation to make me look bad. I was tired of being blamed for things I didn't do. I was tired of being the family scapegoat. That's when I decided I had to fight back, not with shouting or accusations. That would only play into Sarah's hands. I needed proof, cold, hard proof that Sarah was lying, that she had been lying for years. So I started digging. I scrolled through old messages, old emails, and any conversations I could find. I looked for inconsistencies, contradictions, anything that could prove Sarah's stories were false. I began saving screenshots, organizing them into folders on my laptop. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her destroy my life. Sarah might be convincing, but even the best lies start to unravel when the truth comes out. I spent hours combing through years of conversations, texts, and emails, anything I could find that might expose Sarah for who she really was. I didn't know how long it would take or if I'd even find what I needed, but I didn't care. I had to try. I had to prove I wasn't the monster she'd made me out to be. At first, it felt hopeless. Sarah was careful, always vague enough to avoid direct blame, always framing herself as the victim. I found threads where she'd go from, "Amelia just doesn't understand me," to outright claims like, "She's always had issues with anger," when talking to extended family members. The little jabs were all there, buried in the digital paper trail, but nothing that screamed proof. It wasn't until I started noticing the patterns that everything began to click. Sarah wasn't just spinning lies. She was contradicting herself. For example, a group chat from 2 years ago? I remembered it vividly because Sarah had accused me of embarrassing her at a family barbecue. She'd gone crying to mom and dad afterward, saying I yelled at her for no reason. I had screenshots of her texting me the next morning. "Sarah, I didn't mean to make you look bad yesterday. I just wanted mom to take my side for once." I remembered staring at that message in disbelief back then, but I'd let it slide, just like I always did. Now, seeing it again, I realized it was exactly the kind of evidence I needed. Her own words admitted she'd lied. Then there were emails, old ones I'd saved from times Sarah and I argued over things like family vacations or her borrowing money. In one email, she wrote, "Sarah, I don't know why mom thinks I need to apologize. You're the one always blowing things out of proportion. I just told her what I thought she needed to hear." I started compiling everything, screenshots, emails, text messages, anything that showed Sarah contradicting herself or admitting to manipulating situations. I organized them into folders labeled Family Lies, Contradictions, and Admissions. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally getting somewhere. At this point, I knew I needed to test Sarah again. It wasn't enough to gather old messages. I needed fresh proof that her behavior hadn't changed. I reached out to my cousin Sophie, the only family member still speaking to me. I told her I was considering reaching out to mom and dad again to apologize for everything. Sophie immediately assured me that I didn't owe anyone an apology. "You've done nothing wrong," she said. "Sarah's the one who keeps twisting everything." That was all I needed to hear. I knew Sophie still talked to Sarah, and if I could use that to bait her into slipping up, I would. I casually mentioned that I might be moving out of state soon for work. I made sure to say it as though it were an afterthought, something I didn't care if Sarah knew or not. Sure enough, it didn't take long. The next day, my phone rang. It was Mom. "How could you even think about leaving without telling us?" she demanded. There it was. Sarah had leaked the story within hours, spinning it in a way that made me look selfish. "I didn't say I was leaving," I said calmly. "I just said I was thinking about it." "Well, Sarah said you were already planning to pack up and disappear," Mom snapped. "Do you know how hurtful that is?" I sighed, feeling the same old frustration bubbling to the surface. Sarah had taken a harmless comment and twisted it into something ugly. Again, the next day, as if on cue, Sarah posted something cryptic on social media. "Some people just don't know how to be there for their family. It's sad, really." The comments poured in. Friends and distant family offering sympathy, asking if she was okay. Sarah didn't need to name names. Everyone knew she was talking about me. It was infuriating, but it also gave me an idea. Sarah's habit of playing the victim online could be her downfall. She was so desperate for attention, so sure of her ability to manipulate, that she'd left breadcrumbs everywhere. I started saving her posts, screenshots of vague complaints, dramatic captions, and tearful comments. I compared them to texts and emails she'd sent me privately. The differences were staggering. On social media, she painted me as the unhinged aggressor, while in private messages, she admitted things like, "I might have exaggerated a little, but it's not like anyone's going to believe you over me." Her words made my blood boil, but they also fueled me. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. A week later, the opportunity I'd been waiting for finally came. Sarah and I were both invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. I wasn't planning to go, honestly. The thought of seeing her again made me sick, but then I realized it was the perfect chance to catch her in the act. I slipped the small recording device I'd bought into my pocket and went to the party. As soon as I walked in, Sarah zeroed in on me, her eyes lighting up with that familiar smugness. "Wow, you actually showed up," she said with a little laugh. "I thought you'd be too busy pretending to have a job lined up out of state." "Nice to see you too," I replied, keeping my voice even. Sarah smirked, clearly expecting me to blow up like I used to when we were kids. "You know," she added, her voice loud enough for others to hear, "it's funny how you're always the victim in your own stories. Maybe if you worked on yourself, things would be different." I didn't take the bait. I just let her talk, let her dig her own grave. The recorder in my pocket caught every word. Later that night, I listened to the recording. Sarah's tone, her condescending comments, it was all there. She'd tried to make me look bad in front of our mutual friends, but instead, she'd handed me more evidence to prove her true nature. I finally felt like I had enough proof, enough resolve, enough courage to confront her lies head on. I knew this wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my voice, from years of Sarah's manipulations. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The night after the party, I sat in my living room with the recordings playing on a loop. Sarah's voice filled the room, mocking, condescending, and calculated, clear evidence of the way she twisted reality. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't crazy. Years of gaslighting and manipulation had eroded my confidence, made me second-guess everything I thought I knew. But now, hearing her words, I finally had proof. Still, proof wouldn't mean much if no one was willing to listen. My parents had spent years believing Sarah's version of events without question. Even when I tried to explain my side, it always came back to, "But Sarah said," "But I had a plan." I was done being the quiet, obedient sister who let Sarah manipulate everyone. It was time to confront this head-on. The following weekend, I decided to reach out to my parents. I couldn't just spring this on them without warning, so I kept my message short and simple. "Me. I think it's time we talk. I want to clear the air and I want you to hear me out. Can we meet at your house tomorrow?" A part of me expected them to refuse, but to my surprise, Mom replied within minutes. "Mom, of course, honey. We all need to come together as a family." The word family stung in a way I couldn't explain. If we were truly a family, why had I been treated like the villain for so long? But I pushed the bitterness aside and focused on the plan. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I had my recordings, screenshots, and emails neatly organized on a USB drive and my phone. I wasn't here to pick a fight. I was here for the truth. When I walked through the door, the tension hit me like a wall. Mom was in the kitchen, nervously straightening things that didn't need to be straightened. Dad sat on the couch, quiet and unreadable as always. And there, perched like a queen on her throne, was Sarah. She turned to look at me, that familiar smirk plastered on her face. "So," Sarah said, dragging the word out, "you finally decided to show up." "I'm here to talk," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "That's all." Sarah rolled her eyes, but Mom cut in before she could say anything else. "Let's all sit down," Mom said, her voice shaking slightly. "We're here to fix this as a family." We all moved to the dining table, the same one where countless arguments had played out over the years. I took a deep breath and started, "Mom, Dad, I know you've always trusted Sarah, and I get it. She's your baby too. But there are things you don't know, things I need you to see." I pulled out my phone and turned to my mom first. "Sarah has been lying to you for years. About me, about other things. I've brought proof." Sarah let out a sharp laugh, cutting through the silence. "Oh, here we go. The conspiracy theories." "I'm not here to fight with you," I said, leveling my gaze at her. "I'm here to tell the truth." I started with the messages. Those incriminating texts Sarah had sent admitting to exaggerating her stories and manipulating Mom and Dad. I showed them the group chat where Sarah said she wanted Mom to take her side during a past argument. Mom squinted at the screen as I scrolled through the messages. "Where did you get these?" she asked quietly. "They're my messages, Mom." From Sarah herself. Sarah crossed her arms and leaned back. "Anyone can fake texts these days." "Seriously, Amelia? This is pathetic." Without missing a beat, I played the recording from the birthday party. I set my phone on the table, turned the volume up, and let it speak for itself. Sarah's voice came through crystal clear. "Sarah, it doesn't matter what you say. Everyone believes me, not you." "Sarah, you're always the problem, Amelia. It's too easy to make you look bad." The room fell silent. My dad's face paled as the recording played on. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but she didn't say anything. For once, she had no quick comeback. When the recording ended, I looked at both of them. "This isn't about attacking Sarah. It's about showing you the truth. I've spent years being treated like I'm the problem when all I've done is try to defend myself." My dad cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, is this true?" Sarah scoffed. "It's out of context. I was just joking around. And you know, Amelia always twists everything." "Stop," I cut in. "Enough with the excuses." I pulled up the emails next. Messages Sarah had sent to family members pretending to be me, filled with insults and lies. I'd uncovered them days earlier, and now they were on full display. My mom covered her mouth as she read, her eyes wide. "Sarah, you wrote these?" "I didn't," Sarah shouted, her composure breaking for the first time. "She's making this up. She's always been jealous of me, and now she's—" "Sarah," Dad said firmly. His tone was quiet but heavy, and it made the room go still. "This isn't something you can talk your way out of. We need the truth." Sarah's face turned red, her confidence cracking with every second. "You're seriously going to believe her over me? After everything I've done for this family?" "Enough!" Dad's voice was sharp, louder than I'd ever heard it. "Sit down." Sarah sank back into her chair, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I watched her, waiting for her to fight back, but for once, she was silent. The conversation dragged on for hours. Mom cried. Dad paced. Sarah defended herself until it was clear there was nothing left to say. By the end of it, I was emotionally drained but resolute. "I'm not here to pick sides," I told my parents, "but I am done being the scapegoat. I've set boundaries, and I expect you to respect them. That includes Sarah." Mom nodded tearfully, while Dad looked at me with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or guilt. As for Sarah, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I watched her leave, knowing this was far from over, but feeling a weight lift off my shoulders for the first time in years. That night, as I sat in my car outside their house, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and sadness. Sarah might never change, and our relationship might be beyond repair, but at least the truth was out. I'd spent so many years letting her control the narrative, but not anymore. For the first time, I felt like I had taken my power back. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be, but it was a start. The days after the confrontation were a blur. I went back to my small apartment, emotionally wrung out, trying to process what had just happened. For years, I dreamed of this moment, of my parents finally seeing Sarah for who she really was. But now that it had happened, the aftermath felt heavier than I expected. Sarah didn't take the exposure lying down. Within 24 hours, my phone started lighting up with messages. Family members, distant cousins, even mutual friends. Everyone had something to say. Cousin Janet, what did you do to Sarah? She called me crying last night. Uncle Mike, this is family, Amelia. Whatever happens, you don't air dirty laundry. Aunt Rose, I think you need to apologize to your sister. This has gone too far. It was infuriating. Sarah had clearly gone into overdrive, spinning a new narrative to paint herself as the victim. Again, she was good at this, turning people's sympathies toward her like a magnet. I'd exposed the truth, yet somehow, Sarah was already trying to twist it into something it wasn't. I didn't respond to most of the messages. I couldn't. I was too tired to explain myself over and over to people who would never believe me. But one call broke through. My dad. Amelia, he said when I picked up. His voice sounded different, hesitant, maybe even apologetic. I just wanted to check on you. I blinked, surprised. You're calling to check on me? There was a pause. Look, your mom is upset. She's trying to process everything, but I don't know what to think anymore. I listened to those recordings again after you left. It's hard to ignore. Hard to ignore? I repeated bitterly. Dad, she's been lying to you for years. How is this hard to see? He sighed. I know I'm trying. I feel like I failed both of you. For a moment, I didn't say anything. My dad had always been the quieter one, the mediator who avoided conflict at all costs. But hearing him admit fault, even indirectly, made something in my chest ache. You didn't fail me, I said finally. You just didn't see it. But you're seeing it now, and that's what matters. The next time I heard about Sarah, it wasn't from her directly. Sophie, my cousin, the one person I could still count on in all this, called me in a rush. Sarah's spiraling, Sophie said, her voice low. She's calling everyone, telling them you're unstable and dangerous. I thought you should know. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling a familiar wave of exhaustion. Of course she is. It's the same playbook she's been using for years. I believe you, Sophie said quickly. You don't need to convince me, but some of the family, they're starting to pick sides. Of course they were. Sarah was a master at playing on emotions. She'd perfected her act over the years, and for those who didn't know better, it was easy to buy into her lies. What about my parents? I asked cautiously. Sophie hesitated. Your dad's quiet. I think he's rethinking a lot of things. Your mom? She's struggling? Sarah's been leaning on her hard, saying she feels betrayed. A hollow laugh escaped me. Betrayed? She lied for years. And now I'm the bad guy for telling the truth? I know, Sophie murmured, but you've shaken everything up. People don't like when things get messy. She was right. For so long, Sarah's manipulations had been the easy answer. It was easier to blame me than to look at the bigger picture. Now that the truth was out, everyone was scrambling to make sense of it. Over the next few weeks, I stayed quiet, letting the dust settle. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and tried to carve out some semblance of peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting an invisible battle. But Sarah wasn't done. One afternoon, I received an email from her. Just seeing her name in my inbox made my stomach turn, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it open. Subject line, can we talk? Her message was short and cryptic. Amelia, I don't know why you're doing this, but you've taken things too far. You've turned everyone against me, and I can't fix it. Was that what you wanted? I hope you're happy. There it was. The classic Sarah guilt trip. Even after everything, she was trying to frame herself as the victim. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. For years, I'd played into her games. I'd tried reasoning with her, defending myself, hoping she'd see the damage she'd caused. But I knew better now. Sarah didn't want reconciliation. She wanted control. I closed the email without replying. A few days later, my dad called me again. Your mom wants to have dinner, he said carefully. Just the three of us. No, Sarah. I paused. Why? To talk, to try and understand things better. A part of me wanted to say no. I was tired of proving myself, tired of being dragged into their guilt, but another part of me knew this might be my only chance to repair something with my parents. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll come." The dinner was tense but quieter than I expected. My mom looked fragile, as though the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. "I just don't understand," she said softly. "Why would Sarah do this? She's my daughter too." "Because it's what she does," I said gently. "She lies, Mom. She manipulates. And for years, she got away with it because you trusted her more than me." Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt a pang of guilt. I hated seeing her hurt, but this conversation needed to happen. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I continued. "I'm asking you to see the truth, to see me for who I really am, not who Sarah says I am." My dad nodded slowly. "We're trying, Amelia. I promise we're trying." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. As I left their house that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, Sarah had been the center of everything, twisting the truth until I couldn't see straight. But now, for the first time, the cracks in her facade were starting to show. I knew this wasn't over. Sarah wouldn't go quietly. She never did, but I also knew that I didn't have to play her game anymore. She could tell whatever story she wanted. I didn't care. The people who mattered were finally starting to see the truth, and that was enough. It's been a few months since that dinner with my parents, and the dust has finally started to settle. Sarah has gone quiet, or at least, she's run out of people willing to listen to her stories. For years, her voice was the loudest in the room, but now, her manipulations no longer hold the weight they used to. My parents are trying. I won't pretend things are perfect. There are still awkward conversations, lingering guilt, and moments where I sense my mom wanting to defend Sarah. But for the first time, they're listening to me, not her narrative. My dad has stepped up the most. He's shown up to therapy, opened up about his regrets, and genuinely wants to repair the damage. It's more than I ever thought I'd get. As for Sarah, I hear she's still in town, though we haven't spoken. Part of me wishes things could have been different. Maybe, in another world, we could have been real sisters. Two people who trusted and supported each other instead of playing a lifelong game of cat and mouse. But I've let that wish go. You can't force someone to change who doesn't see a problem with themselves. I'm moving on now, really moving on. I've been pouring myself into work, picking up new hobbies, and reconnecting with friends I drifted from during all the chaos. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Free from her shadow, free from the weight of defending myself, and free to build a life that's mine. Sarah may always tell her version of events, but I don't care anymore. I know the truth. The people who matter know it too. That's enough for me. This chapter of my life is finally closed. I don't know what Sarah's future holds, but whatever happens, it's no longer my responsibility. I've let her go, and in doing so, I've found peace. Sometimes the hardest battles you fight are the ones for your own sanity. But when you come out the other side, you realize it was worth every moment. And I did it. I won,